All right, Brian, in part three of today's podcast on the Irish break. Oh, good Lord, completely lost my train of thought. On part three of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we're going to be diving into the
You
roster
okay,
of the
buddy?
offensive line. I am, yeah. I think I glitched. I was like, I got ahead of myself. I almost said on today's FanDuel podcast, brought to you by Irish Breakdown. It was a whole thing. I had to just completely stop.
I almost did that when I was talking to Golick Jr. I started to say our fans at FanDuel, and I said our friends at FanDuel. I was like, wait a minute, our friends at FanDuel. Yeah,
Yep.
so sympathetic to that, my friend.
I get it, man. I almost called myself Vince at the start of the show because of what we were talking about before we went live. Yeah, man. It's just been
I
one
got
of
to
those
tell this
days.
story. I got to tell this story. So we made a new part-time hire at Irish Breakdown. Got a young man by the name of Brian Alt, who's going to be doing some recruiting coverage for us. And I was telling my wife about it. She goes, so you got a Brian and a Brian, a Sean and a Sean. She goes, well, you need one of Trevor or Vince to change their name. And I said to her, I said, well, yeah, I'll call Vince today and tell him he's got to change his name to Trevor. And my wife goes, without missing a beat, she goes, Vince has been here longer. He shouldn't have to change his name. Trevor needs to change his name. To which Vince was very thrilled to hear that story. But I told Trevor that story right before we get started. So that's why Trevor almost called himself by the wrong name.
Yeah, it was close.
You should have just gone with it. This is Vince. My name is Vince Trowbridge. Irish Breakdown. You should have just had some fun with it.
I should have, man. No, I should have. But now we are back on track. My glitch is over. And to recap, first couple parts of the show, I mean, we've talked about, Brian, the offensive line and just the importance of what it's going to mean for this team. In the previous segment, we talked about what Joe Rudolph's part in that is going to be and what we can expect from him. But the common theme throughout the first two segments, if we've talked a lot about how talented this roster is and how deep this roster is, how experienced now this offensive line room is. And that's what we're going to dive into here in part three. Now, the biggest question with this group, actually, before we get there, I don't want to get too ahead of it. I think it's worth noting at the depth of talent in this room because it's unlike something that we have seen before, or at least in the Joe Rudolph regime. That's going to be a huge resource for him this offseason.
Well, yeah, because, Trev, when you look at it, it's so much of the depth in the past was like true freshmen or kind of like some journeyman veterans who just weren't that guy. Now it's like, okay, if your redshirt freshman stud Will Black isn't ready or gets hurt, who are you putting out there? We have a lot of options. One is, let's say Charles Jagasaw's back and healthy. You kick him over there. You can put Gerby Lambert over there and put somebody else at right tackle. You can put Maddie Augustine in there. Heaven forbid, worst case scenario happens, and you've got to put your 6'8", 300+ pound, 5-star true freshman Grayson McHugh out there. Like, there are worse scenarios that you could have in this team. You look at, okay, well, what if there's an issue at center? Okay, well, you've got Joe Otting, who started 6 games last year. You've got Cam Herron, who is a guy that the staff is high on. You have issues at guard. Okay, well, is Jagasaw back? He goes down. Okay, Southern Apture, it's your turn. You know, there's Peter Jones. There's Christopher Terek. There's the freshman class that's competing and battling. You could move Gerby inside to guard if something happens. And let's say your next best offensive lineman is Maddie Augustine. He's your next man in. So, okay, there's an injury at guard, so you kick Gerby inside to guard and you put Maddie Augustine. I mean, I don't know that I would do that. I'm just saying, like, you have so many more of those options now. Something happens at guard, you could kick Ashton Craig back out to guard and put somebody at center, or you could take one of the centers and put them at guard. There's just so many options now, Trev, where you just have all these bodies, and the challenge for the offensive line staff is you need to make sure you're developing guys at a primary position, meaning guard or tackle or center, not necessarily left or right guard. But then you have to figure out who do we cross-train? When do we start cross-training them to make sure? Is if your left guard goes down, is your best option to just put your next best left guard in there? Or is it to move around the entire line? Well, that depends. Is it just to get out of the second half of a game? Or is it, I got to do this for the next 7 starts because this guy has a bad injury? All those things have to get determined. They'll get determined this spring. But to your point, Trevor, this is one of Notre Dame's probably their biggest offensive line since 2017, when you combine length, size, I mean, at 2017 offensive line, McGlinchey was about 315. Mustapher was 300, 305. Quentin Nelson was 330, 340. Alex Bars was 320 plus. And then right tackle depended on who was in the game. When Tommy Kramer was in there, you had a guy who was about 310 pounds, and Robert Hainsey was in there. You had a guy who was like 290. But overall, that was a pretty big offensive line. 2020 had some very good size to it. Liam Eichenberg at left tackle. But Aaron Banks is the only really big guy on that offensive line. This year, you're going to have at least two really big guys in your offensive line, no matter who's starting at right guard. It's either going to be Absher or Jagasaw. Well, they're both 325 plus, and then you've got Gerby Lambert, who's 325 now, but he'll probably be back into the 330s by the time next season rolls around. You've got a 6'7", 316-pound kid in Will Black that's likely to take over, in my opinion, at left guard. Well, left tackle. Well, it's a pretty good sized football player there too, Trev. And so those are things that you look at and you say, okay, there's a lot of tools here to work with. There's a lot of versatile tools to work with, but there's also a lot of big tools to work with because, as we talked about earlier, Will Black, 6'7", 316. Who's the backup to 6'5", 304-pound Anthony Knapp, 6'5", 326-pound Christopher Terek? Matty Augustine's listed at 6'8", 309 by Notre Dame. That's not a small human being. Peter Jones is listed at 6'5", 323. So much bigger offensive line, much longer offensive line. I think it's a more athletic offensive line than what we've seen recently as well. So all the tools are there as a unit for it to be that, but the depth is there. And that's the thing. It's 15, 16 game season, Trev. Someone's going to get hurt. It's just football. Somebody's going to get hurt. Do you take a big step back when that happens? They're in a much better position for that not to be the case. And the one thing that I don't care what your feelings are about Joe Rudolph, the one thing you can argue is that he's had to figure out ways to make sure his line keeps playing well after injuries. And that's the one thing he's done a good job of, and that he's proven without a doubt. In fact, some of the times they've made O-line changes, they've actually played better when they've made the changes than they did before. That's a criticism and a praise of Joe Rudolph. But that's the one thing I don't worry about because of the way they've recruited and the fact that in each of his previous 3 seasons, they've had to overcome long-term injuries to at least 1 or 2 offensive linemen every year. And so I'm way less worried about that this year.
And the guys that are coming in to replace from injury are prepared and ready to play. That also gives me confidence that he and Rob Delaney are taking the time to develop the entire room, not just who the starting 5 are going to be. That's a real key component to the success in the offensive line room. Now, there are a couple things that I'm interested to see how it plays out. In the previous segment, we talked about like Joe Rudolph having to exhibit a level of patience with if they kick Will Black out to left tackle. That being said, at what point do they kind of deem it, okay, maybe he's not ready yet? Because you don't want to get into like a fall camp situation. It's like, yep, we're still waiting on the light bulb to finally click. Maybe it happens and maybe it doesn't. I still think his ceiling is the highest at tackle. But with everything at stake for Notre Dame this year, some interesting conversations to be had. Same thing with Anthony Knapp at left guard. I know Brian does. I know a lot of people in the chat do. He projects the best inside his skill set, his size. But what if it doesn't click right away? What level of patience do you have with him? So a lot of different things, a lot of different moving parts. I'm with you. But I think all of that encompassing brings you to the point where spring is going to be massively important. Yeah. I don't think it's a coincidence, Brian, that the 2 offensive linemen that struggled the most in the season opener were also not consistently around in the spring. I don't think that's a coincidence.
Agree. We're talking about Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner, who were also your 2 most experienced guys coming back last year as well. And to your point, they absolutely struggled the most against Miami in that opener. Spring is going to be a time to test. Like if you come out day 1, first team offensive line, left to right is Will Black, Anthony Knapp, whoever's filling in for Ashton Craig. I don't know if he's going to be healthy or not. Absher or Jagasaw. Again, I don't know that Jagasaw is going to be practicing this spring. I don't. If I had to guess, I'd say probably not full go. And then, so let's just say Black, Knapp, Otting, Absher, and Lambert, left to right. I don't know that that's what we'll see every single day for the remainder of spring. There may be some times, let's get, Cam Herron with the ones. Let's get Peter Jones with the ones. Let's get Chris Terek with the ones. Let's get Matty Augustine with the ones. But the one thing that I hope that we see from Joe Rudolph this spring, on top of just constant hammering of playing with fire, playing with power, playing with authority, technique, and things like that, is patience. If whoever you put at left tackle doesn't look like a seasoned vet or a 27-game starter by day 3 of spring ball, don't panic and kick Anthony Knapp back outside the tackle. Let Anthony Knapp learn at guard, and then let those young guys at tackle battle. Now, if you get like to the end of spring and they just haven't got any better, then you can consider, okay, when we get back for fall camp, are we just going to move Anthony back outside? Let's say that Will Black and Matty Augustine struggle all spring. You may say, hey, you know what? We got to think this through. We may need to, Jagasaw's back. We're going to move him to left guard. We're going to kick Knapp back out to tackle. We're going to have Jagasaw and Absher at guard, Gerby at tackle. And, that's what we have to do because these guys just aren't ready. Oh, if that's the case, then, we need to have that conversation. We can have that conversation. But you don't make that decision after a first week. Now, hopefully they play great and there's no questions, but you have to be prepared for that. So I think a level of patience with Joe Rudolph is going to certainly be needed early on. Now, hopefully he doesn't need patience. Hopefully by the third practice, you're like, yep, these are the dudes. This is going to be it. And hopefully the only concern is, boy, Black's looking great at tackle, but man, so's Augustine, so's Grayson McHugh, so's Styles Prescott. I mean, man, Absher, boy, he's having a great spring with Jagasaw not there. But boy, how about Chris Terek come along? How about Peter Jones come along? Or, man, I love Cam Herron and Joe Otting at center, but dude, did you see what Sullivan Garvin was doing at center this spring? Like, those are the things that you want to have to be debating going into the summer and the fall. And we don't know what that's going to look like in the spring, but that's what I hope the issue is. But if it's not, then that's a typical spring for young players. Just be patient. Give it some time. Keep teaching them and see what those guys are made of.
Agreed. And I'm excited that we get to start watching some of that unfold here in about a week and a half. But really, this is throughout the offseason, not just necessarily for just the spring. And then obviously into the season, the other thing Notre Dame's offensive line is going to need is some studs to emerge. I would argue, and I want to get your thoughts on this, I would argue that Notre Dame hasn't had a consistent dude or dudes on the offensive line since the 2023 season with Joe Alt. Regardless of how some of the other 4 guys played, I knew that on a week-in, week-out basis, Joe Alt was going to perform. He didn't become a top 5 pick in the NFL draft just based on name. It was also because of the performance and what he did on the field. Since then, it's kind of been like this week it's been this guy, this week it's been this guy. You need consistent dudes in your starting lineup. And I think you have the opportunity to have some of those this year, Brian, and Anthony Knapp and Gerby Lambert. They have the opportunity to be that.
Yeah, and I think, we'll get to Ashton Craig in a little bit, but, I think he's probably the guy that we look as the unquestioned leader, and is Ashton Craig. But this is a season where Anthony Knapp needs to step up and become that dude as a player and also as a leader. You don't need just one leader. I mean, the 2017 team had 2 captains on the offensive line. Last year's team had 2 captains on the offensive line. And so you hope that, like, hey, you know what? Like, yeah, Ashton Craig's a captain, or he's at least the leader of the room. But, man, Anthony Knapp has really raised that part of his game as well. But the biggest thing is Anthony Knapp needs to, like, he's not a young guy anymore. Last year he was young. He was still, say whatever you want. Oh, he started 15 games. Yeah, he was still a 19-year-old sophomore, true sophomore. You know what I mean? Like, he was still a kid in a lot of ways. He was a more experienced kid, but he was a kid. Now you're going into year 3. This is your 3rd spring on campus. Actually, yeah, this is your 424. This is your 3rd spring on campus. This is because usually guys are their first, before early enrollees, their first spring was actually before their second year. Their second spring was before their 3rd year. But now early enrollees get their first spring before their first fall. This is your 3rd spring. You've got 27 starts under your belt. And you've had some very good moments. You've played in big stages. You've played in a home playoff game. You've played in the Sugar Bowl. You've played in the Orange Bowl. You've played in the national championship game. You've played at Miami. You've played at Texas A&M. You've played at home against Texas A&M. Like, there's no moment that's going to be too big for Anthony Knapp moving forward. You've gone against big-time players. You've won some of those battles. You've lost some of those battles. Now it's like, okay, bro, it's time for you to take that next big jump and become a stud. And we talked about it in a breakout session the other day. I think you need, I shouldn't say, you don't need elite first-team All-American, Quentin Nelson type studs. But it's a whole lot easier to be a dominant offensive line if you have them. Indiana didn't have like a first-round draft pick, but Carter Smith was a big-time college football player. I believe, Trav, I could be wrong on this, but I thought Carter Smith was an All-American last season. Let me just look this up real quick. Let's see here. All-American team, Carter Smith. Yes, he was a consensus All-American last year. You know who else had a consensus All-American last year? Miami. So, those are things you look at and say, if you can get those guys, it gives you a much better chance of being that team. Oregon had 2 guys that were All-Americans last year. So it gives you an opportunity, Trev, it's easier to have that kind of line if you have guys that are just literally dominant players, physically dominant players. And I think Anthony Knapp has the tools to be a physically dominant player, especially when you've removed the one thing that I think he struggled with, and that's playing in space. What does playing in space mean? It's a lot of things. It's handling speed. It's handling being able to get to where you need to get to and then have the lower body girth and or power to be able to anchor against a bull rush. It's being comfortable with longer movements. Like a guy that's going to push you vertically to the edge and then boom, he's got that inside move that comes on like step 7 or 8 for that guy. It's much different change of direction type of things. At guard, everything happens quick. And that's where Anthony Knapp has been at his best. When he can come off the line and go face-to-face with you, push you off the ball, and really get after it in the run game. But then also in the pass game, he has performed quite well in pass pro against tight techniques for most of his career. Really well. That's more of what he's going to see at guard. I think his game can explode. He's got all the power and athleticism you want in a guard. Somebody in the chat earlier, and I don't remember who it was, said, in the past, Joe Rudolph, I think it might have been Jim Halloran. I think. If I'm wrong, whoever said it can correct me. I apologize if I'm wrong. He said something about that, Joe Rudolph is in the past is like to pull guards. And they ran a lot of gap scheme at Wisconsin. They ran obviously a lot of that in 2023. Is Anthony Knapp athletic enough to do that? And my answer is I think Anthony Knapp's probably their most athletic guard since Joe Rudolph arrived. He's a pretty good athlete. The question is, will he be comfortable doing all that? That's a different conversation for a different day. I would think so. But there's nothing he lacks inside that could keep him from being a stud guard. Well, he's not a real big guy. Yeah, but he's very powerful. Zach Martin was never a very big guy either. Zach Martin didn't look anything. You put Zach Martin and Quentin Nelson next to each other, they don't look the same. Both great guards. They just do it differently. I think Anthony Knapp has all the tools to be that dude. And this is the year. It's like, dude, 27 starts under your belt. Now's the time for you to start to show yourself to be that player.
Absolutely. In terms of career starts, he's your most experienced offensive lineman. He more than doubles up your next 2 closest guys in Lambert and Ashton Craig. I talked about this when we were doing the breakout show. I talked a lot about Anthony Knapp. And he needs to be one of the guys this year where if you need a yard, you're down in the red zone and it's 3rd and goal on the 1. Kind of like what Malachi Fields did against Boise State. It was like, hey, don't overthink it. Just throw it up to me. Don't overthink it. Just throw a fade. You need Anthony Knapp to be one of those guys on the offensive line. Hey, Coach Denbrock, don't overthink this. Run behind me. We'll get the yard. We'll get We'll get the touchdown. Something. Mm-hmm. That's who he has to be, and that's who he has the opportunity to be this year. Another player that also is kind of in line to be that, to be a stud on the offensive line, is Lambert, somebody who started all 12 games as a redshirt freshman. Physically, he was their most gifted player on the offensive line last year that played. He just had some redshirt freshman errors, but he did it at 100 miles an hour. To your point, when you're talking about your mid-zone breakdown, something that I highly suggest everybody go check out, boars@irishbreakdown.com. You talked about how they got a lot of lateral movement, not a lot of vertical push outside of one guy, and that was Herbie Lambert. He needs to be all of that and more this year, especially moving back out to a position where he's the most comfortable. And it's not like he looked super uncomfortable at guard either. But he was probably your most physically gifted offensive line in the starting lineup. Expecting a big year from him as well.
He's probably the most physically gifted of the veterans coming back. And I don't know that it's overly close. I mean, Gerby's got all the talent in the world. He's 6'7". He's got very long arms. He's got very heavy hands. He's a good athlete. Not even just a good athlete for his size. He's just a good athlete, period. His technique was just average last year. And he still was like a pretty dominant player. Like you said, Trev, when you break down the mid zone, it's like one of these does not look like the others. Like one of these is noticeably different. And it's what 76 does once he gets his paws on you. You're moving. You just are. You're moving. Now, he also got himself into trouble at times with footwork and not taking proper angles. Like if you're down blocking on a guy and you can't let him go over top of you, you can't hit him on the front side of his chest. And sometimes Gerby'd come off and the guy'd kind of go over top of him, and you're like, dude, that's the one thing you can't. If he goes underneath you, fine. Jeremiah pops it outside, and you're good to go. You can't let him cross your face. And how do you keep him from doing that? Well, step one is you got to attack him with the proper angle. You know, you go too low, or if you go too high, then he cleanly comes underneath of you. So, like, there's just those little things that you'd expect a first-year starter to struggle with. A lot of guys had those issues in their first years. There were times in 2015 when Quentin Nelson would have some mistakes like that. So it's just going to happen. But, man, when he was dominant in a lot of instances, Trev, and the longer the season went on, the better and better he got. Now he kicks back out to tackle where he's more comfortable, and it's got a chance to be he's got a chance to be a dominant player. And if both Knapp and Lambert take the jump I think they're capable of, that serves as an elite foundation for what this team can be, even before we get to the next point, which is, can Ashton Craig come back healthy, and can he stay healthy? That, to me, everybody talks about Charles Jagasaw. That's the bigger question. Like, I would love for Charles Jagasaw to come back. Charles Jagasaw started 2 games in his career. 2 games. And he's only really played meaningful snaps in 2.5 games in his entire career. Notre Dame would be so good if Charles Jagasaw comes back healthy. But it's like we've kind of had to learn to live without Charles Jagasaw the last couple of years. Ashton Craig is the bigger one because he has played multiple games and then he goes down again. His health is the biggest question mark to me because like with Jagasaw, he's had a couple freak things. It's like if you can avoid the freak things, then I don't think he's injury prone. He had like the one injury in fall camp 2 years ago. But like the thing he did last year wasn't football related. It was a freaky thing. Ashton Craig has gone down in games both times with knee injuries. Can he come back and be the player he was before the injury? And can he finally stay healthy? Because I can live with having to replace a guard or even a tackle. What gets tough is when you have to replace your center, your leader. That's where it gets tough. If he can come back healthy, Trev, and stay healthy, just those 3 guys alone, this offensive line is going to be really, really, really good.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the biggest thing with Ashton Craig is we have concrete evidence of what he can do at the position that he would be playing. We've seen Charles Jagasaw play guard, the position that he would play in the 2026 offensive line for a half. His 2 starts were at left tackle, and they were good starts at left tackle, but one of them was as a redshirt freshman against Oregon State in the bowl game. The other one was in the national championship game, and he held his own against 2 guys that are playing in the NFL. But to your point about Ashton Craig, we know what he can do at center. And we've broken down the numbers before. Statistically, they are a more efficient offense, and they are a more productive offense with him at center. But the reality with Ashton Craig is the next time he finishes an entire season will be the first time he finishes in an entire season. And what he doesn't have going for him this year is that the guy that's backing him up in Joe Otting, it's not we just don't know what he can do in games anymore because now we've seen it. And then in Joe Otting's first start, Notre Dame had one of their best rushing performances of the season. And so this is a very big offseason for Ashton Craig and coming back healthy, because I'm with you. I don't know if there's a more undisputed leader of that room than Ashton Craig. I've gone through and I've read all the transcripts. I've written articles about all of the incoming freshmen, and there's been two common names that I've seen pop up. It's been Ashton Craig and it's been Anthony Knapp, about who they've leaned on, who's taken them under their wing, who's showing them the ropes. But guys like Will Black and Matty Augustine and Cam Herron and Owen Strebig, those guys were saying that about Ashton Craig last year. And so he is the bona fide leader in that room. So there's no questions there. But I'm with you. The biggest thing with him is health. If he can stay healthy, we know what that offensive line looks like.
We know what he looks like.
Yes.
We know what he looks like when he's healthy. There's no now, again, the question isn't, okay, yes, he's healthy and he's back, but is he back to being the player that he was? That's the fair question. And honestly, Trev, I don't expect them, if Ashton Craig is cleared sometime between now and the start of fall camp, and he's back to being the starting center, doesn't miss any time in fall practice and everything's, I don't expect him to look like vintage Ashton Craig against Wisconsin, Rice, and Michigan State, Purdue. I think he's going to look rusty. The question is, okay, when does he get back into his groove? That's the bigger question. And does he have the endurance built up to play 15, 16 games? That's another thing. Now, if it was up to me, Ashton Craig I would pull Ashton Craig when I pull CJ Carr. And that's early in the third quarter with big leads. Like, if you're up 31-7 on a team early in the third quarter, take out Ashton Craig, take out CJ Carr. You can leave the rest of the line in there for another series if you want. Take those two guys out. Now, two reasons why is, number one, I'm trying to save some of the wear and tear on Ashton's legs from having, like, we saw this with Boubacar. Go watch Boubacar and look at his production and just his burst in the last 5 games compared to the first 6 or 7. Because, he was playing a ton of snaps, and he was a guy that had not played a whole lot of snaps here before because he had a knee injury in game 5. Ashton had his in game 6. So those are aspects to it. But if he's healthy and good to go, I have no doubt that Ashton Craig is going to be one of the 7 to 8 best centers in college football next year. That's the kind of talent he has. And now we get into kind of, Trev, you talk about those guys and how important they are. There's a lot of other guys we're going to talk about, but I think that trio right there is keeping that trio together and getting them to take those, the next jump as players for 2 of them, and then the other guy just stay healthy. That's going to be a big key to how good this offensive line is going to be.
Absolutely. That trio is your foundation. Any good unit is built on a solid foundation. Who was the foundation in the 2017 offensive line? It was Mike McGlinchey and Quentin Nelson. And then you needed some other guys to come along. Who was the foundation in the 2020 offensive line? You had Jarrett Patterson. You had Liam Eichenberg. You had Aaron Banks. The foundation for this offensive line would be Ashton Craig, Anthony Knapp, Gerby Lambert. But in a similar pattern to those other outstanding offensive lines that I just listed off, they had a trio or a host of other players that stepped up and contributed. And for this 2026 offensive line unit, you have a trio of guys, some veterans that are pushing for roles. And one of them will likely be taking the first team reps at right guard, and Sullivan Absher, somebody that we saw finish the last, 5 games of the season last year after Billy Strouth went down against USC. He's going to be another player pushing for a role, and I'm excited to see what he could do this year.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing with him, Trev, is like he's not on the level of Jagasaw and Lambert and guys like that, and so when he comes in and he doesn't move people the way that Lambert does or doesn't move people the way that Jagasaw does, I think there's like, okay, well, he's just not that good of a player. Well, he's not as good as them talent-wise, but Sullivan Absher showed some good things last year in his 5 starts, and that was the first 5 starts he'd ever made. I mean, he played against Miami, struggled. That was his first meaningful snaps of his career. I don't count coming off the bench in the Oregon State game or playing mop-up minutes in previous seasons as like meaningful minutes, you know what I mean? And he looked like a guy that was a first-time starter. There were some times he took bad angles. There were some times he, lifted up a little too much, lost his base, didn't play with great pad level. But there's a lot of really good snaps in there as well. And we mentioned in the show yesterday, Trev, I mean, one of your best, I would argue, the best offensive line performance we saw from them all year as far as like quality competition, how well they performed, was the Pitt game. Well, Sullivan Absher was a starter in that game, and I thought held his own against a guy that was pretty darn good that day in Francis Brew. So, I think Sullivan is going to be better this year than he was last year. That experience is going to help him. And then also, he was a guy that played right-handed in his high school career for the most part and early in his Notre Dame career. Well, last year he had to, he had to step in at left guard. Now he's back to, I think, a more comfortable position for him at right guard. And I think combined with the experience is going to allow him to, if he's the starter at right guard, I'm not worried about right guard. Now, look, there's another player that might play there, and we'll talk about him at the very end. But right now, my focus is on Sullivan Absher going out there this spring and taking another step as a player. And all I need from Sullivan is just play with greater consistency and play with more drive. I think the issue for Sullivan last year is you could tell he was thinking a lot. Like really thinking a lot. And it kept him from really just coming off with force. Hopefully the experience allows him to do that. It sometimes maybe looked a little bit like he was kind of, I don't say hesitant, but unsure of what he was supposed to do. That can kind of come with not being experienced. Now I want to say, dude, you know what you're doing. Trust yourself. Trust your teammate. Go out there and drive people off the ball. And I think he's capable of being that type of player at right guard. But, I mean, look, if your least talented player on your offensive line is Sullivan Absher, you have a really, really talented offensive line. Really. There's a lot of teams that he would be their best offensive lineman. Not like elite, Texas, Oregon. I'm saying like there's a lot of teams on Notre Dame's schedule where he's one of your two best offensive linemen. At Notre Dame, he's probably your fifth most talented offensive lineman of the projected starters. That's a pretty good place to be because I think Sullivan Absher is a solid, at the very least, a solid football player that I think has a chance to be even better than he was last year, which is solid.
Agreed completely. He could be what Alex Bars was to that 2017 offensive line, man. He's a lot of potential there, that's for sure. Another veteran that's going to be making a push is Joe Otting, somebody that I had mentioned before that we've now seen in a starting level capacity. He started the final 6 games of the regular season after Ashton Craig went down against NC State and started off pretty hot. I don't want to use the term cooled down because it makes it sound like he played poorly. He didn't play poorly. I think it's just he wasn't as hot as what he was when he was first inserted into the starting lineup. But he's somebody that now has some experience under his belt, and he's going to be another guy that's going to be making a push.
Yeah, he's an interesting player, Trev, because I think that what we saw from Joe is early on, I think he was thinking less. I think he was kind of thrust into the starting lineup, and I just think he just kind of went out and played. And then he started thinking a little bit more, and what started to happen with Joe, and this has actually been a little bit of an issue with him. We've seen in the past, whether it's coming off the bench, whether it's in the blue gold game, is Joe has a tendency to put his head down and gets himself in trouble. And he's got to get out of that. He's got to do more sinking his hips, keep that face up, and see what's happening in front of you. You'd see times where he'd kind of put his head down and go try to hit somebody, and they just make a move and just make him miss easily. And he'd have about 4 or 5 of those in a game where it's like, do you completely whiff? And then there's a lot of good in there in those moments, but you've got to be more consistent as a center. And Joe has got the tools to be that. I was so, I was not happy that that Ashton Craig got hurt, but I'm so happy that you're going into this season with so much experience behind your starting lineup, because you are so better positioned now to step up in those moments. And a guy like Joe Otting, Trev, there's no reason if if he's your next best offensive lineman and a guard goes down, there's no reason you can't kick him out to guard if you feel like he's your next best lineman. But this is also a big spring for Joe Otting, because he's going to have some younger players breathing down his neck a little bit. So that's why the consistency piece for Joe is so important, and why he's got to come out this year and really just say, hey, man, I don't need you to be Anthony Knapp. I don't need you to be Charles Jagasaw. I need you to be Joe Otting, and I need to get the same Joe Otting on every single snap. Smart kid, tough kid, knows what he's doing, plays with good technique, and gets after it. Yeah, okay, you're a little tight-hipped. I understand that. You're not, like as you've gained weight, you're not quite as athletic as you were in high school. Okay, that's fine. But none of those things are going to keep you from being a good, steady football player. But he was also young and had never played a meaningful down prior to the NC State game. And he's just thrust into that role. I think he handled himself well. Now it's like, okay, you got the inexperience out. Now you've got some experience. Now it's about being a more steady player, a more consistent player, being able to replicate those good snaps at a higher level. And if he can do that, he'll solidify himself as that next guy at center should Ashton Craig go down. Or even, hey, you know what, we trust Joe so much that if there's an injury at guard, we don't have a problem moving Joe over to guard. Like, that's the opportunity. But if he doesn't stay if he isn't able to become more consistent, coming from behind him are a couple young guys we'll talk about that could push him. And so that's why I do think I'm happy with what we saw from Joe Otting last year, knowing what the expectation was. Expectation for him wasn't the same as it was for Anthony Knapp. But now that we've seen it, okay, now it's time to work those kinks out and become a more steady player.
Agreed completely. And very excited to watch Joe Otting this upcoming year. Last kind of member of this trio of some of the veterans pushing for roles is Christopher Terek, where he's a guy that really outside of this channel doesn't really get a whole lot of chatter. There's a lot of talk about some other players on here. But Christopher Terek is a big-bodied kid that has the opportunity to make a push at one of the guard spots, give or take. You talked about a lot of the experience coming back behind the potential starting offensive lineup. Christopher Terek has the opportunity to solidify, at the bare minimum, a spot in the 2 deep this year.
Yeah, look, he's an interesting player. He's played well when he's got into games.
Yeah.
Like, he's a good player. The problem is Christopher Terek just hasn't been able to stay healthy.
Yeah.
And so he's missed those moments of development. And the thing for him is he's a guy that his body can get out of control in multiple ways. And I mainly mean, like, he needs to work even harder to keep his body in a good place physically. You know what I mean, Trev? Like, his body is built in a way where if he's not eating right, doing these things, he can get a little top heavy. I thought he looked better last year. That's something he's going to have to keep in mind moving forward. But he's got to stay healthy because he's a big kid. He's got solid feet. He's not as athletic as like some of the other guys we talked about, but he's got good enough feet. Plays a pretty good pad level. But when he's doing it right, he can come off the line and move people. And we talked about that in 2024. We talked about that in 2025. We've talked about that in spring games where when you actually watch Christopher Terek play, like, dude, this guy's not bad. Like, he can move some people, but he hasn't been out there enough because of some, injuries and things like that to where you may not feel comfortable saying, well, if somebody goes down to guard, we're just going to move Christopher Terek in there. It's been, we're going to move people around. So I think this is a big offseason for Christopher Terek to say, hey, look, no, coach, you don't need to move. You don't need to kick Joe Otting out to guard if somebody's not able to go. I got this. And I can play both guard spots, coach. Like that's what I think Christopher Terek needs to do this spring. Because, he's a big kid. He's a strong kid. He's a physical kid. He seems to be a pretty smart player from what I can tell. There's a lot to like about his game. I mean, Trev, there's recent offensive lines that a kid like Christopher Terek is going into the spring like, dude, he's going to start at guard for you. Like, recently. Like
Joe Rudolph
2021, 20. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But as we're going to say with a lot of these veterans, if you don't see that jump, then there's some young guys behind you that are going to gladly take advantage of that. But I think he's a very underrated player that has a chance to, okay, hey, like, this is your chance to show yourself this spring. No doubt.
To your point about the young guys making a push, there's some, and obviously one of them is Will Black. Mm-hmm. He's going to make a push to be in the starting lineup. And based on some of the things that we've heard, some of the things that we've seen, connecting some of the dots, he's probably the odds-in favorite today to be Notre Dame starting left tackle.
Yeah.
It's not a given. They're not just going to hand him the keys to the car and say, cool, we'll see you on September 6th at left tackle. He has a ways to go, but talented kid, man.
They're still handing him the keys to the car. It's just like, now go prove yourself to be responsible and be home by 11. You know what I mean? Don't speed. No, but in his case, like the hope is, and from what all the people that I've talked to, the hope is that he takes advantage of this opportunity. And the thought is that he will. I've heard some things from, and what, I've always said, Trev, when you're getting intel, the best intel is when you're talking to people on the opposite side of the ball, or you're talking to people inside the room, where if I'm talking to a player or a coach or a player or a parent, for example, because I try to talk to coaches, parents, high school, you talk to as many people as you can. And whether you're talking to defensive people or other offensive line people, you always hear about Will Black and the talent he has and the talent he brings to the table. And you talk to people on the defensive line, like, dude, that guy's got loads of talent. I've talked to people around the program like, dude, he's going to be a top 10 draft pick. I mean, you hear all those things. Now it's like, okay, great. Now put it together. Now go show us. And that's the opportunity I believe he's going to get this spring. So I think he's a natural tackle. I've heard, I think that obviously he missed a little bit of time last year with the concussion. Have not heard anything about anyone fearing that that's a long-term issue. Just it happens. 6'7", 316, long arms, athletic, super comfortable in space, plays with great pad level, he's a knee bender. I mean, he's got everything you want in an elite modern day tackle, Trev. He really does. He does. He's got all the tools in the world to be a star. How quickly does that happen? That's the question. And we need to be a little patient with him, understanding he is a redshirt freshman. He will have some mistakes. Not only does Joe Rudolph need to be patient with him, we need to be patient with him and not assume he's going to look like third-year Joe Alt right now. You know what I mean? Like, it took third-year Joe Alt 3 years to get to be third-year Joe Alt. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's, but all the talent in the world, and they're absolutely expecting big things. But when you recruit the way that Joe Rudolph is recruited, Trevor, look, dude, you can't take forever because there's some other guys stepping up. But Will Black, to me, amongst the guys we don't know or haven't seen in a meaningful down, is the key to this offensive line of the guys we don't know a lot about. I went back and watched a little bit of the Navy game last year. I wanted to see Will Black playing tackle, and you're just like, yeah, he's got it. Now it's like, can he play with confidence? Can he play with assignment correctness? Can he add some strength? All those things are questions. But like, we saw him at fall camp last year. You're like, oh gosh, he looks the part. There's no doubt about that. And I'm glad he got rid of that stupid 65. Now he actually looks like an offensive tackle. You know what I mean? Like, give him a real tackle number, and now he's got one at 74. So I'm excited to see what he brings to the table.
I am as well. Another young guy that I'm excited to see this offseason is Matty Augustine. He is somebody that's starting to generate some buzz. He was also a member of the class that Will Black was in, correct? Like, he's somebody that's yes, very excited to see what he can do.
Yeah. He's created, buzz from the moment he got to Notre Dame. I mean, he's a guy that he was a hard guy to evaluate in high school, Trevor, because he reclassified back a year. He was held back a year. She's a little bit older. Part of the reason for that was because he started high school not playing football. He started high school as a basketball player. Football wasn't really his thing. And I remember I'm going to see if I can find it. I remember like when they first started talking to him, and you're like, okay, I don't know who this kid is. And so you start looking into him. And like I said, I'm going to try to see if I can find this picture of him. But there's this picture of him from his first year really playing football. And it was like the 23 season. And I remember looking at him like, this guy's an offensive lineman. Like, are you serious? This guy's not an offensive lineman. This guy is like a basketball player trying to play offensive line. And that's exactly what he was. He was a real skinny, like tall, like kind of lanky, still trying to kind of grow into his body guy. And then you fast forward a year later and he'd added about 30, 40 pounds. And it's like, okay, now he's starting to look like a football player. And he's done well at Notre Dame. He stopped growing like up and out. He's, adding weight, but he's grown into his body. His coordination is kind of, stepped in there, and he's athletic. He's strong. He gets after it. And they're a guy that they're like, look, he's going to battle, if not for a starting job. Like, he's going to battle for the starting job, but like everyone that I talk to is like, the expectation is Will Black's going to be that guy. But Maddie's got a chance to go out there and push him. And if Will Black falters, then Maddie will step right in there. But even more importantly, he's got a shot to step in and kind of be that next tackle off the bench guy, which is very important because as we've seen in the last couple of years, tackles have gone down and he's going to step in. And then if Gerby Lambert's the guy we think he is, there's no guarantee he's going to be back next year. You know what I mean? So hope he will. Hope he will. But the point is, like, this is a kid that has got the tools to, don't just assume the 5 is set right now. Maddie's going to go out there and, in my opinion, compete and doesn't have the fanfare that maybe some of the more highly ranked guys do, but he's a talented football player in his own right. I think Owen Strebig in that class also is a guy that I'm keeping my eye on this year, Trev, but I think Owen Strebig's a little bit more, but he's another year away. He's still physically growing. I mean, if you think about age-wise, I would imagine that, Maddie's a little ahead of Owen, and he's further away from his freshman year of high school than Owen is. You know what I mean? Because of the reclassification. So I'm not surprised by it. He's more of a year away. I think Maddie's kind of going to that year. And then there's another player in that class, Trev, that's going to compete this year. And I constantly hear good things about Cam Herron. And that's why when I say it's a big year for Joe Otting, Cam Herron's the reason why. If Joe Otting doesn't take that next step as a player, then Cam Herron is going to pass him by quickly. Even if Joe Otting takes that next step as a player, Cam Herron is the guy that still has a chance to push him to be that next center. Because whoever wins that backup job this year is going to get the first crack at being the replacement for Ashton Craig. Because one thing we do know is even if no matter what happens to Ashton Craig this year, 2027 Notre Dame's going to have a new starting center because Ashton Craig's out of eligibility. He can maybe sue for a 6th year because he's missed multiple years with injuries, maybe. But if you're healthy in all year, if you're Ashton Craig and you're healthy all year, dude, it's a blessing. Go make your money. You know what I mean? And but high odds that in 2027, when you kick the season off, you're going to have a new center. So that battle behind Ashton Craig, and if he doesn't go this spring very much, then that's going to be a lot of opportunities reps-wise for Joe Otting and Cam Herron. But Cam Herron's a guy that people need to keep their eye on as well. I know Christopher Galloway is going to love this one. He's very high on Cam, but he's a talented player. That battle, you know what, Trev? Like, left tackle's an interesting one, but the battle for who's the next guy inside and outside this spring on the offensive line is going to be very intriguing. Very intriguing. And Cam Herron's going to be a big part of that.
Very intriguing and very competitive. Very excited to watch that unfold as spring goes on. And it'd be kind of cool. I'm frustrated with, I guess, kind of the lack of access that we'll be getting, but it'll be cool to see where they're at on March when we go, coming up here soon, and then where they're going to be at the end of April. I think that's going to be a really exciting transition to see. And,
Trev, we just got done talking about Joe Otting and Cam Herron, and Sullivan Absher's back. They're like, hold on a second. That center for the future battle is not 2 guys, it's 3. And that's going to be true for a lot of these guys in the freshman class. This is a very big, physical, talented freshman class. And while I don't expect any of them to necessarily be that guy, I think this freshman class is like this year, like that guy this year, meaning like they're the next guy off the bench. They're going to make things a little uncomfortable for the older players, where next spring you're like, I know this guy did well, but that's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing in a 6-man class that is wildly talented. We're talking about all the talent at tackle between Matty Augustine and Will Black. Owen Strebig might be a year away. You know who else might be a year away? Grayson McHugh. Like that. I mean, the level of talent that's being brought in, to your point about Sullivan Garvin moving inside, Tyler Merrill and Ben Nichols. If Notre Dame was in a position where they had to be like, hey, Ben Nichols / Tyler Merrill, you got to start for us this year. Okay.
Crap, man. That means we got to put in the 6'5" pound. We have to play this 6'5", 330-pound guy. This is terrible. I don't know what we're going to do.
That's what
Tyler
I'm saying.
Merrill checked in. He's on the roster at 6'6", 329. Now, Ben Nichols won't be here this spring. Neither will Gregory Patrick. But when Ben Nichols shows up, he'll be listed at 6'5", 6'6", and like 325, 330 pounds. Like, they're massive. Massive. And a freshman who's turned a lot of heads. Like, I've heard some really good things about Tyler Merrill. He's really taken to the weight room. Obviously, we've heard great things about Grayson McHugh and his just elite talent. But the guy that I have really heard a lot about, like, dude, this guy is really coming along strong. This guy's really pushing people. Sullivan Garvin. I projected that they were going to give Gregory Patrick a shot at center when I first did my offseason kind of look at the depth chart. The guy that they actually went with was Sullivan Garvin. And I think he's a guy that's really made a strong impression. And the other thing that helps, what helps this room, what helps Joe Otting, what helps Cam Herron, what helps Sullivan Garvin. Can't tell you how many times I've heard about how much Ashton Craig mentors these three kids. Like, not like, oh, shoot, they're my competition. Screw you, buddy. You're not taking my job. But like, he takes it on himself to say, hey, I got to get these kids coached up. I got to be a leader to these guys. And that time behind him is going to be invaluable for all of them. But Sullivan Absher, I have a feeling, is going to make it to where it's going to be a very interesting discussion about who the starting center is going to be a year from now. Very interesting discussion. And he's a guy to keep in mind. And you're already seeing with him, like, have you seen recent pictures of him when either his mom posts stuff or in the Notre Dame stuff? Like, he looks so much different now. Like, he's always been a big kid. He was never like a real fat kid, where he like just had this terrible weight. You have to completely reshape him. Like, he's always just been kind of a big country boy looking thing. But like, you look at him now and his like neck is bigger. He like doesn't really have as much of a neck anymore. It's like his arms are. I mean, the weight room has already done a lot for Sullivan Garvin. Like, that as a kid, you're going to be like, dude, he's going to be a handful. And that's true for all this freshman class. And that's what I'm excited about, is there's going to be some great competition over the next couple of years for those backup jobs, which then are going to turn into who's the next guy when starting jobs come open. But this is a very talented group of young players, and a very big group of young players too. It's very obvious that Notre Dame wants to get longer and thicker. I mean, Sullivan Garvin right now is listed at 6'5", 308. Right now, he is tied for your biggest center on the roster as a true freshman. Right now, Tyler Merrill weighs more than any other guard on the roster right now. So it's like, okay, actually, he's the biggest offensive lineman they have on the roster weight-wise at the present moment. And then Christopher Terek's next at 326. So that's a big boy. And Ben Nichols is going to be right there with him. Sullivan Garvin's the quote-unquote small guy at 6'5", 308 inside. And then Grayson McHugh's listed at 6'8", like 295, 297, something like that. He's going to be 305, 310 by the time we get to fall camp. It's a big, talented group of young players. There's no doubt about it.
Brian, let's wrap up.
I'm still shocked nobody left, real quick, by the way. I'm still shocked nobody left. And I think that tells you a little something about the buy-in from this group. There's going to be some major battles this spring. Second, third team guys are going to be battling against each other. But I cut you off, Trev. There's one wild card we haven't talked about yet.
There is, and it's Charles Jagasaw, who is, I think the best way that I've been able to explain him to people who have asked me about him is it's a conundrum. I don't know if there's ever been another player at Notre Dame that we've only seen play in the Orange Bowl, the national championship, and then another bowl game, and never seen him play in the regular season in a meaningful minute, that we're so confident of what his ceiling and what his impact could be on this offensive line. His injuries have been a conundrum. Like, they were both off the field injuries. It's not like he got rolled up on, he didn't get stepped on, or have, what Billy Shrout did, his knee kind of gave out a little bit. It's been on an ATV and in the weight room. But his whole thing has just been
his first injury was his hand kind of got caught up in an incident like on the field. It wasn't even a weight room thing. We thought it was at first, but he was blocking Jalen Sneed, and something happened that got his arm got in a funky position, and that's what happened to him. And then the other one, like you said, Trev, was what'd you say, ATV accident, right? Like, I keep wanting to say the wrong thing. That's the not UFO, but the other word for, you know what I mean? And I forget what it is, but I keep wanting to say that. But yes, it's been fluky stuff. And the result is we just haven't seen a lot of them. But what we've seen is, holy moly, this guy's good. It's the great unknown, man. He's the great unknown. He's the wild card. Does Charles Jagasaw ever get back healthy? It's not a given. When you have the kind of injury he had and the accident he had, there's a chance there may be some elbow nerve damage that could happen. I'm not saying it happened with him. I'm saying in general, that type of injury, where that injury happened, can create a lot of nerve damage there in your elbow. Similar to kind of what Jalen Smith dealt with. It wasn't the torn ACL, MCL, PCL that ruined Jalen Smith's career. It was the nerve damage that injury caused that made him never the same athlete again. Will that be true for Charles Jagasaw? I don't know the answer to that. And will he be healthy enough to play football again? Okay, that's number one. Number two, if he is healthy enough to play football, is he still that same guy now that he's missed basically 2 full years of development from a practice standpoint? I think there's this notion that Jagasaw, as soon as he's cleared, steps right into the starting lineup. Not for me, he doesn't. I got to see him go through practice. The kid hasn't gone through practice since spring of 2025. He has not taken a rep of practice. And so it's just a great unknown. But here's the okay, this is a negative, but then here's the but to take us back to the top. If he's healthy, if he gets his groove back, he might be your most talented offensive lineman. Certainly, arguably your most powerful. That gap is not as great as it used to be, and it's arguable now. In 2024, there was no question who your most talented offensive lineman was. In 2025, going into the season, and what we thought the projected starting lineup was going to be of Anthony Knapp, Billy Shrout, Ashton Craig, Charles Jagasaw, and Emil Wagner, there was no question who your most talented offensive lineman was. It's Charles Jagasaw. In a world where Will Black and Gerby Lambert are now in the starting lineup, that's more debatable. However, he's in the conversation, and he still might be your most powerful mover on the offensive line. If he comes back healthy, you're not now saying, okay, we're hoping Jagasaw can give you that elite presence. Now you're like, dude, Jagasaw is playing next to an elite player. Now there's a world in which Charles Jagasaw could form a right side of the offensive line where he's the small guy. You know what I mean? Like, think about that for a second, Trev. That's what gets you so excited about it, is if he can come back healthy, fully healthy, and let's just say he's 95% of what he was in the playoffs in 2024. That's still a really good football player. And now you put him next to Gerby Lambert. If you get stopped on 3rd and 1 now, you're fire everyone that's a paid coach of that football team. I mean, I'm joking, obviously, but like, if you run behind the right and you don't run, here's what I meant to say. If you're in 3rd and 1 and you don't run behind the right side of the line, fire everyone. I say sarcastically, because that's going to be a dominant duo if he's back. But that's the problem with Jagasaw, Trev, is everything you say about him is followed by a comma, if he can stay healthy. And that's what makes it such a conundrum. But good night, you can't dispute the talent. Because you make that, he's only played these games and these games. But it's like he was so good in those games. It's like he was so good against Oregon State. Like, he had a really rough first series and then dominated after that. Comes off the bench in the Orange Bowl and dominates. And what's funny, and we like to joke about this, but we haven't talked about it in a while, the most dominant rep he played, he completely did the wrong thing. He went the wrong way and just destroyed some linebacker for Penn State as Jadarian Price is getting tackled in the backfield. And you're like, okay, I know he did the wrong thing, but holy crap, did you see what he did to that Penn State guy? You know what I mean? Like, It was like the Quentin Nelson block from 2017 when he took out that Georgia guy that was blitzing. You remember that? When that safety came on a blitz against from Georgia, and Quentin Nelson saw him and stepped over and just laid him out, just like ended his life. Like that's kind of what Jagasaw did to that poor Penn State kid. He wasn't even supposed to be there, but it just shows you like, boy, this guy, he can run, he can hit. And a kid that had missed all season, hadn't played a snap of left tackle, because when he came back in the playoffs and was practicing at guard. Your left tackle gets hurt, and so then they kick him out to left tackle, and he gives you one of your best left tackle games of the season against Ohio State. That's the kind of talent he has, and that's why you're hoping, fingers crossed, they come back healthy, because now it's not just Jagasaw. It's like, dude, Jagasaw, like Black. And you think about this. If Charles Jagasaw comes back healthy, there's a argument to be made that your least physically gifted offensive lineman is either Ashton Craig or Anthony Knapp. Think about that. Two guys that we have both said have All-American potential. A guy that we said it could be we've said I think Anthony Knapp has the tools to be a first-round draft pick. Like, late first-round draft pick in the NFL draft. And there's a case to be made that he's your fourth or fifth most talented player on the offensive line. I'd argue fourth. I would argue just God-given talent. I'd argue Ashton Craig is number 5 on that list. Think about that. Think about that for a second, Trev. Because at the start of the 2024 season, he was arguably your most talented offensive lineman, him and Schroff. Now he's 5. Not because he's gotten worse, because that's the young talent coming along. It's debatable. You could maybe argue it's Anthony Knapp, but the fact that those are the two we're talking about is absurd. It's absurd how talented this group can be, but it all depends on Charles Jagasaw coming back healthy, and that's the great unknown. That's the biggest asterisk in the history of sports. I say sarcastically is, the big if of Charles Jagasaw. He's this, and he's all the things we say he is, but if.
Yeah. That's the most frustrating part about the entire Charles Jagasaw conversation, because I agree with everything that you said about the upside. It's just that ever looming if. It's the if. Because if he does get it reinserted into the starting lineup, he is now your second least experienced starter next to Will Black, because he has just 2 more starts than Will Black, which is also a crazy thought. The upside and what it would look like on paper is phenomenal. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And it would look absolutely insane on paper. It's a big if. Here's how I personally am looking at the Charles Jagasaw situation. It's all gravy on top. It's a net positive no matter what way you look at it. If he's ready to go, at the bare minimum, he is the best, most gifted backup guard in the entire country until he's ready to be inserted into the starting lineup. But because he's been out of the flow for so long, to your point, I think there is this assumption that the second he gets cleared, he's just, bye, Sullivan Absher. Well, hold on now. Sullivan Absher has almost tripled him up on career starts. And so it's like, I don't know if we're just ready to kick him to the curb yet. I posed this question last year. What if Sully's grooving and the entire offensive line is grooving? Do you shake that up? I think that depends on what he looks like in practice. I think that it's all very interesting, but that's why I'm looking at this is the whole thing is gravy on top. Because at the bare minimum, if he's not healthy, again, that if, your starting lineup is Will Black, Anthony Knapp, Ashton Craig, Sullivan Absher, and Gerby Lambert, what we think it's going to be right now. I mean, it's a net positive because you're not in the stance anymore. The positives of the recruiting and the development of this room is you're not in the position of, if Jags just isn't in it, it's going to be a completely different looking group.
Yes. Yep.
That's a gravy.
Yeah. When I talk about all the stuff we talked about at the beginning of the show, how good the line can be, in my mind, all of that's assuming Jagasaw won't be out there. Because I just have to mentally, that's what I have to do. I have to be there. Because you get into but if he's healthy, and then that's just like, okay, I'm not ready for that type of hype at this point in time. I need to see it, but it's just like, yeah, I mean, good dude, if he's healthy, if you don't, I mean, literally, if you don't have a top 3 to 4 offensive line that has a healthy Jagasaw and healthy Craig and Will Black and Gerby Lambert and Anthony Knapp in it, like, I don't know if you're in the right profession. Like, yeah, I think you might need to think of something else to do with your life. You know, I'm saying that sarcastically a little bit, but I mean, dude, the talent is such, and this is my optimism, is the talent is such that the margin for error is so much greater now because of the depth, the talent, to where you don't have to be Harry Heastan or Joe Moore or Bob Bostad to have a really good offensive line with the talent that they have. But if you are a good coach as well, and you are able to get the best out of those guys, then you're going to have the best line in college football. That's the potential that this line has. I don't know if I'm ready to demand that if he doesn't have the number 1 offensive line in the country, he's not a good coach, because there is still inexperience. There are still injury questions. You're starting this season, if the line is what we think it is, you're starting 3 guys that are either, you know, like that are sophomores or juniors in college. I mean, you're not starting a bunch of 5th-year guys. As a matter of fact, you'd only be starting 1. Your second oldest player only has 5 career starts in Sullivan Absher. So I don't know that I need to be number 1, but they better be top 5. That's the expectation and the standard for this offensive line. And, you know, Trev, as we wrap up, Tom Connor jumped in with a super chat, and he had just jumped into the show. He hadn't had a chance to listen to the beginning yet, but he says, for me, I'm on the fence about Rudolph, but this year will make up my mind, make or break year for him. And you know, Tom, I thank you for that super chat, but I think that's where all of us are and should be, is let's put all of our past feelings about Joe Rudolph aside, and let's all go into this offseason with kind of a fresh slate, because there are a lot of things you can point to. Well, here's why it didn't work out. Injuries here, had to, you know, recruiting had to get better here, and this and that. And there's all these things that you can point to. His first year, you know, their strength coach quits right before the season starts. I mean, there's all these things that you can point to and say, okay, I understand. And let's just start this offseason with this premise. Joe Rudolph has recruited an extremely talented offensive line and really good depth. And let's all define him by what we see this season without holding against what he's done in the past, good or bad, and evaluate this season, because now you're in year 4. Now you have this kind of talent. Now is the season that we ultimately are going to evaluate him on. Because if your response is because you don't like him, well, yeah, but I mean, anyone can coach that up. You're not making the insult you think you are, because who recruited the talent that, you know, built the roster where, yeah, no one can screw that up. Like, let's just say that's something you want to do to take credit away from Joe Rudolph. Well, he largely put that together. Now, okay, yeah, Coach Heastan recruited you know, Sullivan Absher, and either him or Jeff Quinn recruited Ashton Craig, but who coached those guys for their entire careers? I mean, Sullivan Absher never played a snap for Coach Heastan. He recruited them, yes, but he's never played a snap for them. You know, Ashton Craig was with Coach Heastan for 1 year. That's it. So that's what I'm excited to see, Trev, is like, this is the year that we learn who Joe Rudolph really is. And if he can get it done, then we're all happy. Let's keep rocking and rolling. But if he can't get it done, and if you're Marcus Freeman, you got to say, if we can't do it with this group, do we have the right guy leading this group? And that's kind of where we're at. But I say we all kind of just clean slate it and just say, look, this is the year that we determine it. And if he does a great job, then let's give him his praise for a great job, and not do the but what about looking backwards. Can't change any of that. Now's the time where you say, okay, all the parts are in place, everything is there. Now go build something special, coach. And that's the expectation. And if he does, there will be no buts from me. There will be no, yeah, but what about this? What about that? What about, why didn't you do this in the past? Oh, okay, it is what it is. But do it now. And if you do it now, then we can all say, hey, here we go. Notre Dame is now a line-driven program. And that's what I'm looking forward to seeing.
Folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. If you haven't gotten enough IB content today, the guys are going live tonight on IB Nation Sports Beat at 5:05. Interesting topic for tonight. They're talking about the 5 questions that Notre Dame has heading into spring practice. So make sure you tune in to that show. Brian and I are going to be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the midweek rundown, hitting a bunch of different topics. You're definitely not going to want to miss that show. I'm a big fan of the midweek rundown. I love the format. I talk about it every single week. That happens tomorrow at 1 p.m. On your way out of this show, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Enjoy the rest of your evening. For Brian, I'm Trevor. We will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.